Welcome back. I'm Tyler, you're watching Scarving Scarves, and welcome to the 48th installment of Last Week Lolita News. At the top of the segment, Angelic Pretty's latest release, Sugar Sky, has entirely sold out. This reporter cannot attest as to why, and unless there is a yet unknown population whose primary aesthetic is interstellar tint boxes, we've yet to receive an explanation as to why this brand went full flat earther on the female form. Is the designer responsible an 8th grade geometry student whose only passing grade was a pop quiz on the rectangular prism? Was this the basis for designing the bodice? And will the controversy as to whether or not boobs are round be on their next makeup quiz, or do we have to wait until this fracker's prom night for them to round second base, be sufficiently enlightened as to their mistake, and never darken the doorstep of this fashion with their wretched boob cubes ever again? My money's on them learning absolutely diddly, and tune in for next week's rendition of Titbox 2.0. That would be funny if it wasn't so fracking likely, and turning towards a release that almost makes up for the shipping container attached to a skirt. Metamorphoses Memories Garden is offensively gorgeous. This is the only colorway that matters, and the fact that this brand has managed to go 3 weeks without releasing something that offends all 5 senses would be impressive if it weren't for the fact that I give it 2 weeks before they drop something that makes me consider dunking my head into a canister of paint. It would provide a more alluring color palette than whatever nightmarescape Meta was subjecting us to at the time, and frankly, and less expensively than the therapy it would take to forget what I'd seen. $20 for a bucket of bear seems like a damn good deal compared to having a psychiatrist at me for $200, and transitioning to a brand I had the privilege of seeing at Techo 2019. Lady Sloth has announced a pre-order for their Very Berry Prince series to be carried out between the 1st and 20th of this month. The series is set to be shipped in June 2019. I think it's fantastic, and the bright summery feel of fresh-picked berries is a perfect distraction from Texas's foremost season, unbearable heat followed by sweating, followed by hiding in the refrigerator until December the 3rd. This release comes in purple, lavender, and the color I will fight you for, goes all the way up to custom sizes. And given that the variety will allow people in possession of busts to wear something that doesn't necessitate 3 sports bras, angry stuffing, and careful consideration of how long they can stand the pressure before they burst at the seams, I'd say Lady Sloth has cornered the market on frocks that actually allow the wearer to breathe. Props to this Polish brand for being capable of mercy, and to take a look at our final release, BTS has fulfilled the prophecy that show laid down last week by naming their latest series Effuler la Marguerite Whereabouts of Maiden's Love, otherwise known as How Much Frappanese Can Be Stuffed into One Sentence. I'm fully aware that I butchered the pronunciation, but if it's any consideration, I did it with whatever this is supposed to be in mind. There are 2 options that explain what I am seeing. One, I have just been struck by a low-flying bird, and my prefrontal cortex is now processing at the capacity of a bowl of pudding. Or 2, someone actually greenlit this unfortunate laundry basket as a dress. She looks like a traffic cone. She is the fracking model. And if a professional career in posing, God-given personal appeal, and an atomic frack ton of Photoshop still results in this woman looking like a speed bump on the road to why bother, what chance do the rest of us have? Granted, the second cut almost makes up for the offense, and while it's covered in enough crosses to exercise any interest this reporter could have had in it, I can still understand the general appeal if you focus more on the ribbons and less on the fact that this frock is carrying enough Jeebus power to start its own personal crusade. I've seen Sunday school wallpaper more subtle, but I suppose I can tolerate it as a containment frock in hopes of keeping the crosses out of much more appealing prints like puppies, kittens, or other motifs that have no business having a frackload of Christian iconography fired at them with the exuberance of the Spanish Inquisition. As Marie Kondo would say, this sparks joy. And this sparks speculation on how many years in prison it would cost me to go full Old Testament on your ass, seize the means of production, and pump out untainted cat prints until the very moment the federal government is forced to intervene. Do not test me, I have too much time on my hands and just enough spite to continue longer than anyone could advise. Meanwhile, as that about wraps up the week, I have nothing better to do, and apparently this community has broken the record on time spent not actively trying to destroy each other. We turn towards Last Week Lolita News, next special segment. I don't recommend watching this, anything else is more deserving of your time. That said, let's get down to brass tacks. It all started in Ruffle chat. Lovely Lore asked people how they define constructive criticism in Lolita, asked for examples, and ended on the assurance that she intended to make a video about the entire shebang for the benefit of the EGL community. That is the video you should be watching if you want to learn anything of value, and the following is the one you should not be giving any space in your skull because this show show is piloted by a woman who saw a legitimate concern in the Lolita community and decided it was the perfect opportunity to say terrible things about it until whatever legitimacy I still possess becomes debatable at best. Also, she stole my pose, and now we are in the middle of a feud. Last chance to go watch Lore instead, and without further ado, welcome to the actual point of this torturous exercise. As the foremost bastion of only one side of constructive criticism, heavy on the second half, and generally useless on the first, this show's heavily unbalanced view on the subject as it relates to critiquing Lolita fashion cohorts is separated into 6 pieces. This small rule book is best applied to spaces where people receive criticism on their cohorts in places like Closet of Frills or other outlets where advice is expected or given. And even with all of that context, you should still expect to learn nothing of actual value. This is still the wrong bloody channel. That said, enough of my word making, let's get down to Rule 1. Rule number 1 of concrete in the realm of Lolita fashion: criticism of something someone cannot change, such as their face, body, or other things that would take a team of trained surgeons to reposition under anesthesia, are not fracking constructive. Someone's nose reminding you of an Escher painting is not something you need to divulge if you're not looking to get smacked in the face. The weight of an individual is not your concern, and if the bit you happen to be addressing can't be squared away for anything under $100, a wig, or adding an underskirt to spare small children a sudden crotch shot, then you have strayed into the territory of being an unbearable prat, and let me assure you that that position is already taken. Rule number 2, for criticism to be constructive, you have to offer alternatives. Suggesting a different type of blouse, shoes, or accessories comes off a lot more useful than saying their cord looks like Party City hit it with a truck. The thoughtful consideration will likely soften the blow for a creature that apparently put in enough thought into the outfit to post it to the internet, but not enough to look into the basic rules of the fashion. And while it might seem like coddling to have to treat every Tom, Dick, and Mary like the slightest remark might send them into hysterics, it pays to remember that exuberance often outstrips common sense, and those newer to this fashion are more likely to improve if their first experience isn't followed by 50 comments that they look like sadness and sin. Speaking of things that shouldn't be approached with a 10-foot pole by anyone other than trained professionals, rule number 3, go easy on handmade. This rule is best understood with cakes. What better pastry to base it off of in this fashion, and can be thought of like so. If you buy a store-bought cake and I tell you it tastes like the concentrated bitterness of a 20-something wage slave working out of a Kroger bakery with a master's degree in physics, you might cock an eyebrow. You might also kick me out of your house, but you will do so with no more damage to your psyche than the knowledge that your dinner guest is an unbearable twit. However, if you bake a cake from scratch and I tell you it would have been better to apologize to the eggs for the insult, you would be more likely to pause, consider the specificity of that comment, and then come to full terms with the fact that this twit has just roundly insulted you. Not only you, but your effort, intelligence, and skill set in one overly wordy sentence, and now you have to sit there with one less guest and a whole lot more failed pastry than you were comfortable consuming while sober. The same could be said for handmade. It may not be exactly fair to think that one needs to be more delicate with them, but as their cords come more from a place based on several hours of work and an investment of time and material, and less from a wayward click and a transfer of funds, the garments often take on some personal pride. And seeing 70 comments telling them that their accomplishment looks like a tube sock with lace attached, while cathartic, does absolutely nada to help them improve, and is much more likely to have them plotting creative ways to nuke the entire community from the dashboard of the Hubble telescope. Now, is someone who can't sew a skirt without coming out with a small tent going to be able to hack the Hubble telescope and install unheard of nuclear functions? No. Can we avoid a totally different meltdown in an underwater basket weaving community by a fully functioning adult? Yes. Speaking of near-nuclear events, nothing makes this reporter look into new and exciting ways to yeet someone off a cliff faster than seeing people who have absolutely no investment or interest in wearing this fashion reach into their vacant gray matter and pull out a comment as to how an actual Lolita's cord just isn't up to snuff. Granted, their attempt is always a flaming red arrow pointing directly to the fact that they have no idea what they're talking about. I like to think everyone knows that, but given how commonplace it is in groups like Closet of Frills, I think the following needs to be said. If you do not wear the fashion, you do not get a say. Your vocabulary on EGL-specific groups should be limited to smiley or heart emojis, and should you think to stray outside of commenting anything that couldn't be added to a greeting card for someone you deeply respect, you should keep your trap shut and leave the Lolita-ing to people who have managed to strip away enough of their dignity to don several layers of petticoats and a dress that says part disenfranchised Duchess, part topic that no one brings up at Thanksgiving due to the parasol incident of 2013. You wouldn't call a crossing guard if your toilet exploded, and this fashion doesn't need nitpicking from people whose best claim to the privilege is looking like their style inspiration begins and ends at a sniff test before pulling it off the floor. You can have an opinion once you've walked the gauntlet of spending a week's worth of groceries on a garment specifically designed to make your butt look like the evidence of a small explosion. I don't make the rules, I just enforce them without mercy. And on a related note, rule number 5, do not make the same comment 50 other people have made. This will require you to actually read before you drop a few brain cells on telling someone to wear a blouse, but you should know that if this post has been up for more than 5 seconds, the likelihood of other people saying the exact same thing you've been thinking of posting goes up exponentially. This means, hey, maybe you should wear an underskirt has already been typed, and while it might be convenient to simply scroll right down to the comment box and leave a testament to your general impatience, it is not conducive to anyone's improvement to ask for advice, receive a tidbit of it, and then have a crowd of people gather to pitch the same tidbit in their face until the object loses their ever-loving mind. Simply liking the comment you agree with feels much less like the sudden attack of a mob of malicious parakeets, and it makes it much more likely that the poster will actually continue reading and get to comments more specific than "put down the sneakers or the Rilakuma gets it." Meanwhile, that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you for watching Last Week Lolita News. This has been Tyler. You've been watching Scarfing Scarves. And before you wander off to go wonder at the links this reporter will go to fill time, you should know that this show is sponsored in part by BB&B. Their jewelry is the best thing to happen to this community since the advent of the hoop skirt, and you can find their offerings at bbnb.net. Link to their shop below, and to wrap things up with a big fracking bow, I'd like to thank my patrons for continuing to support this show despite all signs that point to better prospects. I can't tell you enough how much it means to me that you guys stick around, and should you like to join a group of people with enough endurance to put up with multiple shots of coffee and enough ineffective gibbering to drive the best of us mad, you can head over to patreon.com/lastweeklolitanews for more content that shouldn't be viewed by anyone ever for any reason. I am not responsible for what you were about to see. Thanks again, guys, and I'll catch you next time.